Hi, my name is Brett Collins. I'm the librarian specialist for the Art Tatum African American Resource Center at the Kent Branch Library for part of TLCPL, Toledo Lucas County Public Library. I chose the book Ron's Big Mission, which is about the great astronaut Ron McNair, who was a hero whose story many people might not know. And I thought it would be a good tribute because he overcame and made a change that has outlived him and has impacted a lot of people. So, Ron's Big Mission. "You're up early this morning, Ron. What's the rush?" asked Mrs. McNair. "Come and have your breakfast. I made some oatmeal." "I have to go, Mama," said Ron, tying his shoes. "I have something to do this morning." "You always have something to do," said his mother with a smile. "Just be home by lunchtime, okay?" Ron was 9 years old. That morning, he left his house with a plan. He'd been thinking about it for a long time. It was a beautiful South Carolina summer day, and Ron looked up at the blue, blue sky. Someday, he thought, he would be up there, flying a plane. He wanted to be a pilot when he grew up. But today, Ron had something else on his mind, something very important. Ron walked down the street as fast as he could. He didn't want to be late. "Hi, Ron," the grocer called from the front of his store. "There you are, just in time for a donut." "Morning, Mr. Douglas," said Ron. "Thank you, but there's someplace I've got to be." And Ron kept on walking. Down by the schoolyard, Ron saw his friend Carl shooting baskets. "All right, you made it," called Carl. "Hi, Carl," said Ron. "I wish I could stay, but I've got something important to do." "More important than basketball on summer vacation?" said Carl. "Are you kidding?" Ron laughed. He loved to play basketball, but not today. Today was too important. Ron kept on walking. When Ron got to the Lake City Public Library, he stopped. This was it. He was hot from walking so fast, and he was nervous. He took a deep breath, lifted his head high, and went inside. Mrs. Scott was busy getting ready for all the people who would be using the library today. As the head librarian, she had to make sure that everything was neat and orderly. Mrs. Scott looked up to welcome her first visitor of the day. She smiled as Ron walked in. He was her best customer. Ron gave a little wave to Mrs. Scott and went right to the shelves. It took Ron a while to find some books. He always looked for books that showed children who looked like him, but that was hard. There were not many books about black kids on the shelves. At last, Ron found some books on airplanes. He took the books and started to walk to the front desk. Ron felt nervous, and his hands felt a little sweaty, but he knew what he wanted to do. Mrs. Fielding, a white lady who was often in the library, stopped him. "You can give me the books, and I'll check them out for you, Ron," she said gently. "No, thanks, Mrs. Fields," Ron said. "I'm going to do it all by myself." "But Ron," she started to say. Ron was already on his way to the front desk. He put the books on the counter. "I'd like to check these out, please," said Ron. The desk clerk didn't look at him. Didn't she hear me? Ron wondered. Ron knew what he had to do. He jumped on the counter. He wanted the desk clerk to know he was serious. "I'd like to check out these books," he said quietly. At first, the desk clerk and Mrs. Scott just looked at each other. "You know you can't check out books, Ron," said Mrs. Scott. "You can read them here. That's the rule. Only white people can check out books from the library." Ron looked at Mrs. Scott and the desk clerk politely, but he would not budge. "I always read them here. Today, I want to check them out," said Ron. Mrs. Scott and the desk clerk did not know what to do. Ron wouldn't get off the counter. People were staring. Finally, the desk clerk called the Lake City Police. Two policemen came right over. "Let someone check out the books for you, son," said one of the policemen. "You know the rules." But Ron just shook his head. He would not budge. Now Mrs. Scott called Ron's mother. Mrs. McNair came to the library very quickly. "I know how you feel, baby," she said, "but you have to follow the rules." "I can't, Mama," Ron told her. "It's wrong. The rules are not fair. Why can't I check out books like everyone else?" No one said anything. Not the desk clerk, not Mrs. Scott, not the policeman, not even Ron's mother. Mrs. Scott looked at Ron. She thought about all the times that Ron came into the library and all the times he sat at the table for hours looking over so many books. He was her best customer, and she knew what she had to do. Mrs. Scott walked back into her office and started writing. Ron wondered what she was writing. Mrs. Scott returned and handed Ron a library card, his library card. Ron looked at Mrs. Scott and smiled. As he jumped to the floor, he thought he saw her smile too. "I'd like to check out these books, please," he said, handing the card to the desk clerk. The desk clerk took his library card and stamped the cards in the back of the books. "These are due back in 2 weeks," she said. Ron smiled. "Thank you," he said. He tucked the books under his arm and took his mother's hand. Together they walked home. Ron couldn't wait to get to his room and open to page 1. The boy who was Ron McNair grew into a man who flew planes just like he dreamed he would do. He became an astronaut. Today, everyone in Lake City remembers him. They remember him every time they walk into the library. The red brick building at 234 Main Street is a special place. The walls in the children's room were painted with pictures that show children reading books under a huge oak tree. A space shuttle flies through the sky. Inside the library, anyone can get a card and check out books. Young Ron McNair had a dream. On that day in 1959, he made it start to come true. Because of him, many young people have a chance to dream. "You can only be a winner if you are willing to walk over the edge," astronaut McNair once told a group of children. "You are eagles. Spread your wings and fly to the sky." Many years ago in Lake City, South Carolina, young Ron McNair became a hero. Years later, in 1986, astronaut Ron McNair was once again a hero. He lost his life when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded on January 28th, with the loss of the entire crew.
A couple of years ago, NASA began to canvass the country for space shuttle astronauts. And I saw one of these, saw that they were looking for scientists who did not necessarily have military backgrounds. And I fitted all the qualifications. I made my application along with 8,000 other people and went through the various screening processes and came out in decent shape. So I went to the guidance counselor to see what advice she may be able to give me. Well, she gave me piles and piles of standardized tests. I took them for about 3 days. Finally, the test results were in, and I went back to talk to her to see what she had to say. And I sat across the desk, and she looked up at me. And she looked down at that pile of standardized tests. She kind of shook her head, looked back up at me, and she said, "I think you ought to go ahead and try physics, because I think you're good enough." Well, that's all I needed. Some authoritative figure, somebody to say, "You're good enough." Well, as I graduated from North Carolina A&T and went on to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to begin work on my doctorate, and what turned out to be a prize fight, with each round lasting 1 year long, a 5-round prize fight. Well, I stepped into the ring, armed with the gloves of eagerness, cheered on by a great crowd of hope. When after 2 days into the first round, I was caught by a devastating uppercut from the entry qualifying exam. As I watched the birds around my head, I could still hear the voice of my guidance counselor saying, "Get up and fight because you're good enough." On the second round, I thought perhaps the first round was a fluke. I got up and moved in for the kill when out of nowhere came this tremendous right cross from a doctoral qualifying exam. Well, as I lay there with my back pinned to the canvas of defeat, wondering if I even wanted to get up or not, I heard from the sidelines, a thesis supervisor saying, I know where you're from, I know what you're made of, get up and fight because you're good enough. On the third round, I began to move with finesse. I began to bob through classes and weave through exams. I opened up the fourth round with devastating jabs of knowledge. I followed through with tremendous crosses of hard work. By the end of the fifth round, that great giant lay stretched out across the canvas. I pulled off my gloves, walked across the ropes, grabbed my diploma, and I cried out, I am better than enough. This is the message that I would like to leave in South Carolina this afternoon. You're better than enough. You may not come from the most well-to-do financial background. You may not come from the most affluent social background. You may not have glided through the University of South Carolina with the greatest of ease. But if you're willing to work hard, sacrifice, and struggle, then I proclaim today, you're better than enough.